Okay, welcome. Today we're doing a deep dive into something hitting corporations right where it hurts. Cybersecurity. And we're not talking about just, an IT headache anymore. Our sources show this is now about global supply chains, it's hitting executive pay, and it's forcing major changes in the boardroom.
That's really the core of it. It's shifted. We're looking beyond just external attackers and more towards the internal strength or maybe fragility of organizations themselves. So our mission today, as you listen, is to really unpack these sources we've gathered. We've got news reports on huge industrial shutdowns, some fascinating research on AI being exploited, and even a specialist risk checklist.
Right. And the goal is to understand the vulnerabilities, yes, but maybe more importantly, why some companies recover almost instantly while others just fall apart.
Exactly. It comes down to the response, which is all about governance. That's what seems to decide whether you bounce back or face total collapse.
Okay, let's establish this right up front then. The big takeaway, the fundamental insight, is that cyber incidents aren't just tech issues now. They're about governance, they're about company culture, and they have very real, very direct economic fallout.
Absolutely. Think about it when a massive company sees its factory shut down on, 4 continents. That isn't just a firewall failing. That points to a much deeper systemic failure in corporate resilience. And that conversation has to start right at the top, at the executive level.
So let's get concrete. Let's measure this impact by looking at that contrast you mentioned, paralysis versus resilience. And a really stark example of paralysis is what happened at Jaguar Land Rover, JLR. They were hit by that group, Scatelet Spider, right?
Yeah, the JLR situation is, it's a pretty devastating case study in how failures can cascade. The attack wasn't just contained to one place. It shut down production globally. We're talking factories in the UK, India, Slovakia, Brazil, all grinding to a halt.
What specifically stopped working?
Core functions. Things like ordering essential parts for the assembly line, even registering new vehicles. Employees were apparently sent home because there was literally nothing for them to do.
And the key thing from the source is this wasn't just a blip, was it? It went on for over a week.
Over a week, yeah. Which, in manufacturing terms, is an eternity. The losses just multiply exponentially.
So connecting back to governance, where was the critical misstep there? What allowed it to be so bad?
It seems the critical error was likely a governance decision made probably for efficiency, maybe cost savings. They centralized key systems like supply chain ordering across continents, but without building in enough local resilience, enough backup layers.
Creating a single point of failure.
Precisely. A single point of catastrophic failure. You absolutely have to do the rigorous planning beforehand, identify those core IT systems, what supports stock ordering, what supports vehicle registration, and then you determine the maximum acceptable downtime for each.
But if your recovery plan takes a week, but you can't operate for more than a day without parts?
Then you have a fundamental mismatch between your governance, your planning, and your operational reality. That's what seems to have happened at JLR.
Okay, now let's contrast that failure with a story of accountability, which brings us to Qantas. This is interesting because it wasn't just about fixing the tech, it hit executives' wallets.
Yeah, this Qantas story is potentially a game changer. After they suffered a cyber incident, and it seems it might have been the same group, Scatelet Spider, that hit JLR, the executives saw their bonuses cut.
Even though the airline had a good financial year otherwise?
That's the crucial part. Yeah, financially sound year, but bonuses were reduced anyway. Reports suggest cuts of up to 15%, which for the CEO could be over €250,000.
Wow.
And importantly, it wasn't framed as covering the cost of the breach itself. It was explicitly about shared corporate responsibility. That reframes everything. Cybersecurity stops being just an operational cost line item.
And becomes a key performance indicator for the leadership.
Exactly. It becomes a strategic accountability metric. Suddenly, when a security failure directly impacts the C-suite's compensation, you find the budget for necessary defenses often appears much more readily.
Which makes the Valencia Chamber of Commerce example really stand out. Here's a much smaller organization, not a global giant, facing a similar threat, ransomware.
Yeah.
But their outcome was totally different.
Totally different. They got hit, files encrypted, ransom demanded, but they recovered quickly and, crucially, without paying.
How? What did they do right?
It sounds like straightforward operational discipline. They had security backups, copies of their data that were up to date, tested regularly, and kept offline.
Offline being the key word there.
Absolutely key. Because if your backups are connected to the network that gets hit, they can be encrypted too. Valencia's backups were safe. So they just restored their systems, reported the crime, and got back to business. No negotiating with criminals needed.
It sounds almost too simple, though. If tested, offline backups are the answer. Why are huge companies like JLR seemingly struggling with this basic step? Is it really just complacency? Or budget?
I suspect it's often a failure of audit combined with a degree of complacency. You know, leadership might sign off on buying a backup system, tick the box. But the crucial governance step is ensuring those backups are tested regularly, under realistic conditions.
So simulating a real disaster.
Right. The difference between JLR's paralysis and Valencia's recovery wasn't necessarily the attacker's skill level. It seems to have been the basic organizational homework. Valencia did theirs.
Okay, so doing the homework, the basics like backups, can prevent disaster. But attackers aren't standing still, are they? They're constantly finding new ways in. Let's pivot to the sheer ingenuity we're seeing now. We're moving beyond just tricking users into clicking bad links.
Yeah, the landscape is definitely evolving. And one of the most concerning developments is the rise of so-called zero-click vulnerabilities.
Zero-click meaning the user does absolutely nothing.
Exactly. No interaction needed. You don't click a link, you don't open a file, you don't enter any data. The attacker exploits a flaw directly in the software itself to gain access. It's incredibly sophisticated because it bypasses the human element entirely, at least initially.
And we have a source detailing a specific campaign like this.
Yes, a report on a cyber espionage campaign starting around May 2025. It exploited a zero-click vulnerability in WhatsApp.
WhatsApp affecting?
Primarily Apple users, so iPhones and Macs. At least 200 individuals were reportedly targeted. And the vulnerability was apparently serious enough.
That the immediate advice was quite drastic, wasn't it?
It was. Before a proper patch was ready, the recommendation was to temporarily disable the feature that lets you link WhatsApp across multiple devices, like your phone and your computer.
Which tells you what about the attack vector?
It suggests the attackers were exploiting those deep synchronization mechanisms between devices, mechanisms that users fundamentally trust to just work seamlessly. They weaponize that trust.
Okay, weaponizing trust. That leads us perfectly into another novel tactic mentioned in the sources. This one involves AI, specifically X's AI assistant, Grok. The tactic is being called grokking.
Ah, yes, grokking. This is, well, it's quite clever in a malicious way. It's all about exploiting the perceived authority and trustworthiness of an AI assistant.
How does it work exactly?
So the attackers start by placing paid ads on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. But here's the trick. They hide a malicious URL, a link to a harmful site, within a part of the ad's metadata that standard content filters might not scan properly, like the from field.
Okay, so the bad link is hidden in the ad's plumbing, so to speak.
Right. Then the attacker, or maybe an accomplice, interacts with Grok, X's AI. They ask it a seemingly innocent question about the ad, something like, "Hey Grok, where does the video in this ad come from?"
And Grok, trying to be helpful,
goes and fetches the information, including that hidden metadata. And because it's programmed to provide answers, it retrieves and then publishes the malicious URL in its response to the user.
So Grok itself inadvertently launders the malicious link. It presents it as a legitimate answer.
Exactly. The user sees the link coming directly from Grok, the platform's own trusted AI assistant, and assumes it must be safe. The AI lends it false legitimacy.
That's pretty sneaky, exploiting the AI's helpfulness.
It really highlights a risk with rapid AI deployment, doesn't it? There's this rush to integrate AI everywhere, but have these systems been tested enough against these kinds of adversarial attacks, these unexpected logic flows?
It seems attackers are figuring out how to exploit the AI's ingenuity and our inherent trust in automated systems faster than the defenses can keep up.
That's the race we're in. Adequate testing time, thinking through these kinds of trust exploits becomes absolutely critical.
So, facing these evolving threats from basic failures to sophisticated AI exploits, organizations need a clear framework. Let's use the structure from one of our expert sources, a kind of cybersecurity risk checklist focusing on 3 core areas: people, perimeter, and protocol.
That's a good way to frame it, like a pilot's pre-flight checklist, but for corporate resilience. Let's start with risk 1, the people, the human element.
Still the biggest factor.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The data consistently shows that the vast majority of breaches still involve some human weakness. It could be using weak or repeated passwords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 still shows up far too often.
Unbelievable.
Or it's clicking on malicious links in phishing emails, sharing sensitive data without thinking, the usual suspects. But the point isn't just that people make mistakes. The real vulnerability is often organizational governance that allows those mistakes to have catastrophic consequences. Systems should enforce better practices.
So what's the required action then, beyond just training?
Training is important, but it's not enough. Systemic enforcement is key. Strong password managers should be mandatory, non-negotiable. But you need to layer that with more advanced tech,
Like what?
like next-generation security systems. For example, XDR, extended detection and response. This isn't just looking at one laptop or one server in isolation.
It connects the dots.
Exactly. It correlates potential threats across everything, your network, your cloud services, your email, your endpoints. It spots patterns that indicate a larger attack and can even trigger automated defensive actions. It helps compensate for inevitable human delays or errors. In today's environment, something like XDR isn't a luxury. It's pretty much essential.
Okay, essential tools for the people aspect. Let's move to risk two, the perimeter and technology. This feels like the traditional view of cybersecurity, but with some modern twists.
It is, but the challenge here is often technical debt and, frankly, poor initial design choices. Infrastructure is still too often built, prioritizing speed or minimizing upfront cost, rather than embedding security right from the start, what we call security by design.
And the big problem highlighted is obsolete equipment, stuff that just can't be secured anymore.
Yes, that's a huge headache. We're talking about, say, 15-year-old computers still running critical processes, or machines using ancient versions of Windows that no longer receive security updates. They simply can't be patched against modern threats.
And the danger is that just one of these old machines can compromise everything else. The sources mentioned examples like an old point-of-sale terminal, a TPV, or maybe legacy equipment in a hospital.
Precisely. Imagine a hospital with millions invested in state-of-the-art network security, but there's one old, unpatchable imaging machine connected to the network because the vendor doesn't support newer operating systems.
That one machine becomes the gateway for attackers.
It's the weakest link, the easiest way in, and that compromises the entire modern infrastructure. The governance failure here is often either balking at the replacement cost or being locked in by vendor contracts for specialized software that only runs on obsolete systems.
So the action is
Active lifecycle management.
Yeah.
You have to monitor all devices connected to your network, and you need a concrete plan and budget to retire or, at the very least, isolate these obsolete systems. Programs like Spain's Digital Kit aimed at modernization can sometimes help, but the onus is on the company to manage its tech debt proactively.
Okay, people and perimeter addressed. That leaves risk three, governance and response, which you've called the protocol. This sounds like where everything comes together or falls apart.
It really is the ultimate test of organizational maturity and resilience. You'd be shocked how many organizations still operate without a clear, defined, and tested incident response plan. It's like driving without a seatbelt, hoping you won't crash.
And as we saw with JLR, having a plan that's outdated or just sitting on a shelf doesn't count.
Absolutely not. Poorly controlled or untested plans lead directly to the kind of paralyzing downtime JLR experienced. The plan has to be a living document.
So what does a good protocol look like today, especially with regulations tightening?
It needs to be clearly defined who does what when. It needs to be tested regularly through realistic simulations. And it has to be adaptive, learning from tests and real-world incidents. Critically, it must include having those recovery solutions ready to go, like the tested offline backups Valencia used.
And regulations are forcing this now.
Increasingly, yes. Frameworks like NIS2 in the European Union are a big step. NIS2 doesn't just recommend good practice. It places direct responsibility on senior management, including the CISO, for ensuring cybersecurity measures are adequate and effective. There are real teeth to it now.
And AI comes back into play here too, not just as a threat, but as part of the solution.
It has to be. Integrating AI for defense is becoming essential. Using AI to detect subtle patterns, to assess threats faster than humans can, to automate some defensive actions, you simply can't afford not to use these tools when you know the attackers are using AI for offense. Ignoring defensive AI is like fighting with one hand tied behind your back.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive has really shifted the perspective, hasn't it? We've moved from seeing cyber risk as purely technical to understanding it as a fundamental issue of executive accountability, Qantas being the prime example there.
Yeah.
We've seen how attackers are getting incredibly sophisticated with zero-click and AI exploits like grokking.
Definitely a new level of threat.
And we've broken down the essential defenses into those three core pillars: managing the people, securing the perimeter and its tech, and having a robust, tested protocol or response plan.
Those three pillars, handled with proper governance, are the foundation of resilience. The stakes are just, well, they're too high now for complacency to be acceptable at any level, especially the executive level.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, here's a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider. Given the massive economic disruption these major cyber failures can cause globally, maybe it's time to think bigger.
Hmm.
Should global commerce perhaps move towards something like mandatory third-party certified compliance standards for corporate cybersecurity governance? Think along the lines of how ISO 9000 standardized quality management historically.
So making resilience an auditable, non-negotiable requirement for senior leadership to even keep their jobs.
Exactly. Is that the direction we need to go to force the issue?
That's a fascinating question. It really pits the need for robust enforcement against the principles of corporate self-regulation. Definitely something for the next generation of risk managers and policymakers to wrestle with. A worthy challenge.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the evolving world of corporate cybersecurity and resilience.